If Labour wins the next election, it will renationalise almost all passenger rail services within 5 years. It states that upon the expiration of current contracts, a new public entity would take over and manage the services. Additionally, it promises improved internet access on trains and automatic reimbursements for delays in trains. Hugh Merriman, the Minister of Rails, however, called the plans unfunded and pointless. He added that Labour will eventually have to raise taxes because they did not have a plan to pay for the bill attached to their rail nationalisation. In the 1990s, private businesses were given the responsibility of managing train services, and since then, rail usage has increased dramatically since the British Rail era. However, they have come under fire for their prices and dependability, with detractors claiming that this has resulted in an unreliable and ineffective system that has let passengers down. Despite not using the term nationalisation in its strategy, Labour's approach essentially amounts to that. As outlined in its blueprint, private enterprises service contracts will be replaced by Great British Railways (GBR), a new arm's-length body, when they expire in the next years. GBR would run the services and schedules before eventually replacing Network Rail as the entity in charge of maintaining and enhancing the rail network. Clearer and more transparent, however, the party claims that GBR would lease rolling stock going forward, much like private enterprises do, since it would not be responsible to bear the expense of purchasing it. Additionally, Labour does not want to nationalise rail freight companies. Instead, it will maintain the viability of privately funded, open-access operators, like Lumo and Hull Trains. Louise Haigh, Shadow Transport Secretary, argued that her party was not made up of ideologues, and that it was appropriate to work with private enterprises when they provided value. She claimed, however, that the existing setup was not working, and had resulted in traffic jams and delays. In addition, Labour promises to provide a best price ticket guarantee, which would guarantee that, while using contactless payments, passengers always pay the least expensive price for their tickets. According to Ms. Haigh, the method would be more transparent and clearer, but the assurance would not inevitably result in lower cost. Also, the administration has stated that it wishes to streamline tickets. Labour had no plans to close ticket offices, she added. COVID-19 shock in 2021, the government announced plans to establish a new public sector organisation called Great British Railways, which would be in charge of managing train infrastructure and granting contracts to private enterprises. The proposal has been postponed, and even though a draft bill to carry it out has been released, it is unlikely to pass into law before this year's anticipated general election. The majority of train firms in England switched to contracts where they receive a fixed charge to conduct services and the state bears the financial risk, effectively giving the government control of the railway during the pandemic. The government's operator of last resort strategy is currently being used to manage 4 significant operators, including TransPennine Express, which has also been placed under public management. Renationalising train contracts, according to Labour, would not come with any costs because they wouldn't be cancelled early. It also contends that the improved rail system's long-term efficiency might save taxpayers as much as £2.2 billion. According to the government's estimate in the 2021 reform plan, by putting an end to inefficiencies and fragmentation, it may save £1.5 billion a year after 5 years. GBR would, according to the party, be operationally independent. Nonetheless, the largest modifications to services and infrastructure would need approval from the Transport Department. It intends to, mercilessly, hold GBR accountable by establishing the Passenger Standards Authority as a new watchdog. Ms. Haigh responded, "We know there are no quick fixes and we're not going to see enormous change overnight." When asked when passengers would notice the improvements to services, Labour claims would come from bringing rail firms into its version of GBR. Enacting new laws and implementing structural adjustments will require time. She replied that Labour will sit down and work out a solution when asked how it would attempt to end the ongoing pay dispute with the train drivers' union ASLEF, pointing out that the Transport Secretary had not spoken with the union since early last year. According to her statement to the BBC, modernising working practices and railroads is something her party always wants to do, but it must be done in partnership with the workforce and not treat them as an enemy. Labour, she stressed, would not divorce reforms from discussions. She omitted to mention if Labour would raise the proposed salary. While he acknowledged that radical change was necessary, Andy Bagnall, chief executive of Rail Partners, which advocates for rail firms, stated on BBC Radio 4's Today programme that nationalisation was not the appropriate means of bringing about such transformation. Using private operators to attract passengers back and regrow the railway, while keeping Great British Railways a public sector organisation was, in his words, the best of both worlds. According to him, this would guarantee that the railway takes as little subsidy as possible. That's the danger with nationalisation. We believe that without that commercial focus, costs would creep up over time, revenue growth will be slower and the taxpayer is the one that loses out. Wera Hobhouse, a spokesman for the Liberal Democrats on transport, claimed that the Conservatives had left commuters paying higher prices for poor services and endless disruption. The Liberal Democrats want a plan which puts commuters first by establishing the Great British Railway body after years of the government dithering. Labour's proposal to integrate train operating businesses into a publicly owned network is, in the best interests of railway workers, passengers, and the taxpayer, according to RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch. However, the strategy should be a first step to completely integrating all of our railway into public ownership, he stated.